What happens when one of Hollywood's most admired action stars finds out that a popular late-night host may have been quietly undermining his career? Tonight, we explore the surprising backstage moment that caught the entertainment world off guard. This is the untold story of how Dwayne Johnson's visit to Jimmy Kimmel Live became a pivotal event, one that reshaped how we view late-night TV. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment, because what you're about to hear may change your perspective entirely. The atmosphere in the Jimmy Kimmel Live green room was noticeably tense that evening. Dwayne Johnson sat quietly, scrolling through his phone with a look his closest friends would recognize, controlled anger just beneath the surface. His makeup had been done, yet he didn't move. His jaw tightened as he stared at a stream of recent text messages that had just come through, moments before he was supposed to go on. "Mr. Johnson, you're on in 5 minutes," a nervous production assistant called out. She had worked on the show for years, but had never seen a guest look quite so intense backstage. Dwayne looked up slowly. The usual charm in his expression was gone. "Tell Jimmy I need a word with him alone before we go live." "Sir, we're already tight on time, and Mr. Kimmel is in the middle of his monologue." "Then get him off stage." His tone remained steady, but there was a sharpness to it that made the assistant instinctively take a step back. Out front, Jimmy Kimmel was finishing his opening monologue, leaning into his signature self-deprecating style, unaware of what was unfolding just beyond the curtain. The crowd laughed along as he joked about celebrity culture and Hollywood excess, not realizing they were seconds away from a moment far more gripping than any planned skit. "We've got a great show lined up tonight," Jimmy said, his voice full of the usual late-night energy. "Dwayne Johnson is here, and I've got some questions for him, ones that are long overdue." The audience cheered, but backstage, those words struck Dwayne like a warning. Rising from his chair, his 6'5" frame cast a large presence as he headed toward the stage entrance. The crew rushed to make the last-minute meeting happen, but it was already too late. Jimmy had begun the introduction. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one, the only, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson." The familiar entrance music played, and Dwayne had no choice but to step onto the stage, carrying with him information that could either damage his own reputation or reveal a side of Jimmy Kimmel the public hadn't seen. As he walked out from behind the curtain, the crowd greeted him with enthusiastic applause, but to Dwayne, the sound was drowned out by the pounding of his own heart. Jimmy stood from his desk, arms open in the well-rehearsed greeting that had welcomed countless guests over the years. But as Dwayne approached, Jimmy's confident smile flickered. There was something different about The Rock tonight. Something that made Jimmy instinctively more alert. "Dwayne, great to see you, buddy," Jimmy said, offering his hand for the expected handshake. Dwayne looked down at Jimmy's hand, then back at his face. The pause that followed seemed longer than it was, just a few seconds. Finally, Dwayne accepted the handshake, but instead of the quick, polite grip everyone anticipated, he held on a moment longer, firm enough to make Jimmy's eyes briefly widen. "We need to talk, Jimmy," Dwayne said quietly, his voice low enough that only the front row might have caught it in person, but the microphones made sure the entire audience did. "Well, that's why we're here," Jimmy answered, forcing a smile as he gently pulled his hand back. "Let's sit and catch up." As they walked to their seats, Dwayne noticed how Jimmy shifted slightly, turning his body at a subtle angle, creating just a bit more space than usual. It was a small defensive move that most wouldn't notice, but Dwayne, who had spent years studying people, knew it for what it was, a signal of someone preparing for confrontation. "So Dwayne," Jimmy began, sliding back into his host persona, "you've got a new movie coming out, and I know the audience is excited to hear more about it." "Actually, Jimmy," Dwayne interjected, cutting through the flow with a calm but firm tone, "I think we need to start with something else." He paused just long enough to hold the moment. "I think we should talk about the conversations you've been having behind closed doors." The audience instantly felt the change in tone. This wasn't the friendly back and forth they expected. Jimmy let out a laugh, but it sounded thin and strained. "I have a lot of private conversations, Dwayne. You'll need to be more specific than that." "The ones about me," Dwayne clarified, "where you've made sure that certain opportunities never reach me." Jimmy's face flickered through a series of small, fast reactions. Confusion, then concern, and finally settling on a calm, measured look. "I honestly don't know what you mean." "Is that so?" Dwayne said, reaching into his jacket and pulling out his phone. "Because these messages tell a different story." Sensing that something unplanned and potentially serious was unfolding, the camera crew began adjusting their angles. In the control room, the director scrambled to decide whether to cut to commercial or let the moment continue. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, his usual polished demeanor starting to slip. "Dwayne, I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Dwayne's tone rose just enough to signal tension. "Jimmy, I've been in this industry long enough to recognize the difference between confusion and a deliberate effort to harm someone's career." The audience sat in complete silence, aware they were witnessing something far more genuine than typical late-night entertainment. Jimmy glanced toward the side of the stage, possibly searching for guidance from his producers on how to handle what was quickly escalating. "Maybe we should take a quick commercial break and talk about this off-camera," he offered, reaching toward the cue button. But Dwayne reached out, stopping him with a steady, deliberate hand. "No, Jimmy. Let's handle this now, right here in front of everyone. Isn't that your specialty, talking about people while the cameras are rolling?" The atmosphere was thick with tension. Jimmy's usual composure was gone, replaced by visible unease. His eyes scanned the room, clearly looking for a way to regain control of the situation slipping away from him. "Dwayne, seriously," Jimmy said, trying to reset the tone, "I think you're reading too much into something you may have misheard. Let's get back to your movie and keep this light." "Light?" Dwayne responded with a level, calm voice that carried more weight than any raised tone. A few audience members shifted uncomfortably. "There's nothing light about what you've been doing. Making calls to studio heads, telling them I'm hard to work with, that I'm unreliable, that I'm not a smart investment. That's not light, Jimmy." Jimmy's face noticeably paled, though he tried to hold his defensive stance. "That's completely untrue. I would never say something like that about you or anyone else." Dwayne raised his phone, the screen glowing brightly under the stage lights. "Really? Because I've got a message here from Marcus Chen over at Universal. You remember Marcus, don't you? The executive producer who was considering me for that action franchise. The one your friend ended up being offered instead." "I honestly don't know what you mean," Jimmy replied, though the confidence in his voice had faded. "Marcus messaged me about an hour ago," Dwayne said, now sounding more assured, while Jimmy's tone grew uncertain, and I quote, "Just a heads up, Jimmy Kimmel reached out last week, asking if the rumors about your behavior on set were true. He seemed really unsure about whether you were the right fit for our project." The studio went completely silent. Even the camera crew seemed frozen. Jimmy started to speak, then closed his mouth again, perhaps realizing that at this point, any response might only make matters worse. "That's not all," Dwayne continued, his tone steady but firm. "I have another message here from Sarah Williams at Disney. Apparently you spoke to her about how I might not be the best choice for their upcoming superhero project. You told her I had a reputation for being difficult during contract discussions, and suggested they consider other candidates." Jimmy finally responded, though his voice sounded strained and defensive. "Dwayne, if I did have any such conversations, they were just open discussions about the business. People ask for my thoughts on actors all the time." "Your thoughts?" Dwayne leaned forward, his presence causing Jimmy to lean back slightly. "You're a talk show host, Jimmy. Since when did you become responsible for casting decisions? When did it become your job to influence who gets which roles in Hollywood?" "I never said I was deciding anything," Jimmy replied, wiping at his brow despite the cool studio air. "When people ask me something, I give them an honest answer." "Honest?" Dwayne let out a dry laugh. "Let's talk about honesty. Let's go back to your conversation with Tom Bradley at Netflix 3 months ago." Jimmy's reaction was immediate. His expression shifted, color draining from his face as his hands gripped the armrests tightly. "I don't know who that is." "Tom Bradley is Netflix's head of original content," Dwayne explained, addressing the audience now visibly engaged. "And 3 months ago, he was considering me for the lead role in a new action series. It was a major opportunity, worth around $50 million over 3 seasons." Jimmy swallowed, the sound amplified in the quiet studio. "I still don't know what you're implying. What I'm saying is this. Tom Bradley called me directly. He said you reached out to him with what you called serious concerns about my professional behavior, that you told him multiple people had said I was getting harder to work with, that I had an ego problem, and that Netflix might want to think twice before signing me on for such a high-stakes project. The crowd started to murmur, slowly grasping the gravity of what was being laid out. This wasn't just a disagreement, it appeared to be a calculated attempt to damage someone's career. Even if I did talk to people in the industry, Jimmy replied, his voice barely audible, it doesn't mean I was trying to hurt your reputation. Doesn't it? Dwayne stood, his height creating a stark contrast with Jimmy, who remained seated. Let me ask you something, Jimmy. In any of these discussions you had about me, did you ever share anything positive? Did you mention my work ethic, my professionalism, the consistent success of the films I've been part of? Jimmy stayed quiet, staring down at his hands. Or were those conversations only about alleged problems, complaints about my attitude, warnings about why studios should think twice before hiring me? I might have brought up a few concerns I'd heard, Jimmy admitted quietly. Concerns from who? Dwayne pressed. Because I've been asking around, and nobody seems to know where these so-called concerns came from. Nobody except you. The audience remained riveted, clearly aware they were witnessing something far outside the realm of typical late-night fare. This wasn't staged, it was a real conflict unfolding on air. You want to know what I think this is really about, Jimmy? Dwayne continued, now pacing slowly behind his chair like someone presenting a closing argument. I think you got jealous. I think you saw the momentum I had, the audience connection, the public support, and it didn't sit right with you. I think instead of celebrating someone else's success, you decided to quietly try to block it wherever you could. That's not true, Jimmy said, though his voice lacked confidence. Then help me understand, Dwayne replied calmly. Explain why a talk show host would go out of his way to contact studio executives just to raise doubts about an actor's reputation. Explain why you'd risk your own standing just to undermine mine. Jimmy glanced around the studio, seemingly searching for support, but his team, like the audience, looked just as stunned. Eventually, he turned back to Dwayne, a hint of resignation settling in. Maybe I did share some concerns about you with a few people, he admitted slowly. But it wasn't out of jealousy. I honestly felt that your success was starting to affect your behavior. My success went to my head? Dwayne repeated, his tone lifting for the first time. Jimmy, I've been nothing but professional with you. I've come on your show multiple times, treated your staff with respect, and never once gave anyone a reason to question how I conduct myself. You changed, Dwayne, Jimmy said, finally making direct eye contact. You became bigger than all of us, and you started acting like it. His words hung in the air, weighted with a mix of accusation and long-simmering tension. The two men faced each other, a silence settling that seemed to span more than just this conversation. It reached back over years of unspoken rivalry. Dwayne stood still for a long moment, absorbing Jimmy's remark. When he finally responded, his voice was calm but firm enough that everyone leaned in to hear him clearly. I became bigger than the rest of you, he repeated, testing the phrase. Let me tell you what really happened. I worked harder than most. I showed up early, stayed late. I treated everyone on set with respect, no matter their role. I earned my success through hard work and consistency, not by taking cheap shots at others behind their backs. Jimmy shifted in his seat, sensing that his explanation had only made things worse. I didn't mean it that way. Then how did you mean it? Dwayne pressed, voice tightening. Because what I hear is that my success made you uncomfortable, and instead of being honest about that, you chose to quietly sabotage me. That's not what I was trying to do, Jimmy replied, barely above a whisper. Then how do you explain it? Dwayne asked. What do you call personally reaching out to executives just to plant doubt about my work ethic? What do you call spreading concerns no one else seems to be aware of? What do you call interfering with projects that could have earned me tens of millions of dollars? Jimmy started to respond, but Dwayne raised a hand to stop him. Actually don't, Dwayne said. Let me explain how I see it. I call it sabotage. I call it professional envy, taken to a level that's not just unethical, it's unhealthy. The audience remained completely silent. They now understood they were witnessing something that would be discussed long after the episode ended. A few people in the front row had pulled out their phones to record, ignoring the show's typical no-filming policy. "You know what's truly disappointing about all of this, Jimmy?" Dwayne went on, his frustration now fully visible. "The worst part is that I actually looked up to you. I believed you were one of the few genuine people in this business. Someone who built a career through talent and hard work, not by tearing others down." "Dwayne, come on, you're blowing this out of proportion," Jimmy said, his voice noticeably unsteady. "Out of proportion?" Dwayne snapped. "You cost me a $50 million Netflix deal. You've been quietly working behind the scenes to damage my career for who knows how long, and you think I'm overreacting?" "I never expected it to reach this point," Jimmy said weakly. "But it did, didn't it?" Dwayne shot back. "And we're only having this conversation now because people in the industry finally decided to come directly to me instead of listening to your narrative." Jimmy looked around the studio, eyes darting nervously. "Can we just go to commercial? We can settle this off camera." "No," Dwayne said, voice steady. "We're not taking a break, and we're not settling this in private. You made the choice to talk about me behind closed doors. Now we're going to address it openly." "Dwayne, please," Jimmy said, his tone now filled with real desperation. "My career, my name, everything I've worked for." "Everything you've worked for," Dwayne repeated, voice sharp with disbelief. "Jimmy, your career was built on guests like me. Actors who came on your show, helped boost your ratings, and supported your platform. And this is how you repay that support, by turning on us the moment we're out of sight?" Jimmy began to rise, perhaps thinking he could regain control by ending the segment, but Dwayne's presence alone seemed enough to keep him in his seat. "Sit down, Jimmy. We're not done." "I think we are," Jimmy said, attempting to sound in control. "This is my show, and I'm ending this interview." "Your show," Dwayne said with a humorless chuckle. "Jimmy, after tonight I doubt this will still be your show. Everyone in this room, everyone watching at home, and everyone in the industry will see who you really are." Jimmy's face turned pale. "You can't do this to me." "I'm not doing anything to you," Dwayne replied calmly. "You brought this on yourself. Every call you made, every doubt you planted, every false statement about my reputation, that was all you. I'm just shedding light on it." "Security," Jimmy suddenly shouted, his voice cracking. "I need security." The guards emerged from the wings but didn't approach Dwayne. They looked confused, unsure how to proceed. After all, Dwayne hadn't made any threats. He had simply laid out the facts. "What do you expect them to do, Jimmy?" Dwayne asked. "Have me arrested for telling the truth? Removed for confronting your dishonesty?" Jimmy glanced at the guards, then at Dwayne, then at the audience. The room was filled with people watching him in silence, some shocked, others clearly disillusioned. He had lost command of the moment, and possibly his future. "I want him off my stage," he said quietly to the security team. "Your stage?" Dwayne stepped forward slightly. Without raising his voice or hand, he made Jimmy shrink back in his chair. "Jimmy, after what's been exposed tonight, this isn't your stage anymore. This isn't your show. This is the moment your professional mask slipped." The guards finally moved, but only to stand between them, looking more concerned with easing the tension than taking action. "Mr. Johnson," one of them said respectfully, "it might be best if you left now." Dwayne looked at the guard, then back at Jimmy, who now appeared small and deflated. "You're right. I've said what I needed to say." He straightened his jacket and turned to the audience. "Everyone here, remember this moment. This is what it looks like when envy and quiet sabotage are brought into the open. When someone tries to damage another person's livelihood and thinks they won't be held accountable." As he walked toward the edge of the stage, Jimmy made one final attempt to salvage something. "Dwayne, wait. Maybe we can figure something out." Dwayne stopped and turned back. "Figure something out, Jimmy? The only thing I'll be doing is ensuring that every major name in this industry hears the truth. Every executive, producer, agent. They'll all know exactly what you've been up to, and that you can't be trusted." "You'll ruin me," Jimmy whispered. "No, Jimmy," Dwayne said, as he reached the edge of the stage. "You did this to yourself. I just made sure people saw it." With that, Dwayne Johnson walked off the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live for the final time, leaving behind a host whose career would never fully recover from what had just unfolded. The audience remained silent, fully aware they had witnessed a moment that would leave a lasting mark on late-night television. Jimmy sat frozen in his chair, staring at the space where Dwayne had stood, realizing that everything he'd built was unraveling, and there was no clear way to fix it. That's the story of how Dwayne Johnson publicly confronted Jimmy Kimmel's covert efforts to damage his reputation, bringing an end to their professional relationship and casting serious doubt on Jimmy's credibility in the industry. What do you think truly motivated Jimmy to try and derail The Rock's career? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more revealing stories that pull back the curtain on Hollywood.